And our fourth main topic today gets submitted to us by Patreon, one of our Patreon supporters, Ian A. Barth, who writes, "Hey, John and Rob, how you doing, Ian? So No Time to Die opened this weekend to, wait for it, 56 million. Honestly, kind of surprised after Venom's astounding opening weekend. What does this say more about the current state of the box office, Venom's popularity, Bond's lack thereof, or something else? Very curious to hear what you guys think." All right, thanks a lot for sending that in, man. And yes, listen, James Bond No Time to Die came out this past weekend. I had a really, really good time with it. Personally, myself, the critic scores were good. The audience scores were good. And you started hearing like things like Box Office Pro and a few others coming out and saying this movie could, they didn't say it would, but they said this movie could hit $100 million in the opening weekend box office. It had done really well overseas early. Like it was breaking records, Rob, overseas for its thing. But then the Thursday night preview numbers came out, and it was around $6-something million. And while that's good, I remember thinking at the time, well, that doesn't have it on pace for Venom. And it kind of has it a little bit behind. If you look at the way it's rolling out, behind a couple of other things. I don't know that this thing could hit $100 million. Well, sure enough, it didn't hit $100 million. It came significantly below that, around $56 million. Now, this comes just from the folks over at Variety, who writes, "In light of the ongoing pandemic, assessing initial box office results for No Time to Die isn't as clear cut. For some movies, especially during the public health crisis, an opening weekend of $56 million worldwide would be cause for great jubilation. But No Time to Die is no ordinary film. It carries a massive $250 million production budget, to say nothing of the more than $100 million marketing spend. Add in the tens of millions it costs for the delays. No Time to Die, which is supposed to premiere in April of 2020, before the pandemic altered those plans." So now, Rob, I went back a bit and I saw that, the studio projections for No Time to Die was somewhere, I think, around 60 to 70, I think, was the studio's projections. Of course, there were some of the industry out there, like Box Office Pro and others, were saying things like this actually could hit $100 million, especially in light of how well it did overseas. As a matter of fact, as of right now, No Time to Die has already made over 300 million worldwide. Like, it's already sitting at 313 million worldwide. In other words, you take a movie like Free Guy, which has been considered to be a really huge success, and it is. No Time to Die has almost made as much money as Free Guy, and it's just up at this point, up till now. Of course, the big difference is Free Guy did not cost almost $400 million in production, marketing, and late fees, for lack of a better term. The tens of millions it's cost them in interest for all the delays, and then the bumping of commitments, the reissuing of marketing, all that kind of stuff. I mean, this thing, we're probably talking costs $400+ million at the end of the day, when you're looking at the total cost of what it would cost to put this thing out. Now, doing real well overseas, don't want to take any of that away from it. But Rob, some people like yourself have mentioned before, don't underestimate the difference between how popular this character is in a lot of the world versus how popular he is in the US, because he's not nearly as popular. He's James Bond is a very popular character in the US film markets, obviously, but he's not as popular here as he is overseas. And while this thing is breaking records in some other territories, and hey, listen, 3 months ago, if you're talking about a movie opening with $56 million, given today's circumstances, that actually doesn't sound so bad. But when you knew that the ceiling for this was higher, the potential for this was higher, especially with the fact that it did, well, there are critics and some fans that didn't like it. The majority of the critics are giving it positive reviews. It's got like a 90% audience rating now on Rotten Tomatoes. There was pretty good word of mouth. It was still not able to kind of hit that stride. 300+ million worldwide, pretty good right now for its start. But it is disappointing when you see what it got here. Rob, as you look at these numbers coming in, how do you feel about the worldwide totals, and why do you think this movie is doing so much better in other markets than it is here?
Well, if you look at, I pulled up on Box Office Mojo the former box office for both Skyfall and for Spectre. For Skyfall, 27.5% of its worldwide gross was made in the United States, and only 22.7% Spectre made domestically, whereas Skyfall 72.5% was made internationally. And I just think, the Bond franchise it's not a franchise that the kids are looking forward to, John, whereas Venom is. Bond is an aging franchise. It's been around since 1962, and it traditionally brings in older audiences. I think, frankly, there's a lot of people that didn't go to the movies to see this because there's the traditional demographic for Bond films. A lot of them are still uncomfortable going to theaters. I think that's one aspect of it. Two, I've said before, the movie is the longest Bond film, so
yes,
less showings per day. But ultimately, we shall see. I mean, Skyfall made $300 million domestically. Spectre made $200 million domestically here. It doesn't look like No Time to Die is going to be able to reach either one of those heights, but we shall see. It's certainly not that it's not a good movie, because it's very handsomely mounted, and while I had problems with it, it was certainly a good time at the movies. I mean, I enjoyed watching it. It's certainly epic in scope and feel. But I do think that probably the reason it didn't do as much business is that the audience for Bond movies skews a little older, and people just didn't turn out the way they have in the past.
It's funny. Somebody wrote into me prior to the weekend and asked a question. They said, do you think the fact that the audience for Bond skews a little bit older, whereas something like Venom may skew younger, will hurt Bond? And I said, maybe. And I said, but there's an alternate way of looking at that. I said, what we're seeing, the reason a lot of the animated films aren't going to theaters right now is because they think a lot of parents while parents may be willing to go to the theaters, they're hesitant to bring their kids into crowded places right now. Yeah. And I said, so maybe the fact that Bond does skew towards an older audience, maybe it'll help it. I mean, obviously that wasn't true. I mean, clearly that wasn't true. But I did say that at the beginning of the week. I said, I don't know, maybe the fact that it skews older might help it. And clearly it didn't. So there's that. It's going to be interesting to see what, if any, kind of legs this will have moving forward. Internationally, the legs have been incredible. We've been seeing things like only 20 to 30% drops in international markets and stuff like that, which is great. It's going to be interesting to see how that handles here, because you don't have Dune opening next weekend. So that's working in its favor. You do have films like The Last Duel, which I already got my tickets for. Very excited about that. But it doesn't have a major blockbuster to contend with next weekend that I can remember. So it should have the potential to do some good repeat business, maybe. But Rob, to your point, the length of this film may hinder some repeat business. I mean, the fact that it is well north of 2.5 hours, that could hurt or it could help. I mean, I don't know, but it is a little bit surprising. Again, not anywhere near what some of the industry are projecting to be 100 million. I kind of bought into it because, I've been guessing low on a lot of the box office numbers. And so when they start saying, this thing could hit 100 million, I bought into it. I was like, okay, yeah, I believe it. Of course it didn't. But it did come closer to what the studios themselves were projecting. Again, they were projecting around $60 million. So I guess that was more realistic, but still it's going to be interesting to see. Rob, let me ask you this. How do you think the legs on this are going to do? Like, obviously you want, when you're a movie like this, you want to see a 50 to 60% drop. Lower would be even better. Higher is worrisome. There's not a major blockbuster next weekend for it to contend with. How do you think this movie's going to fare in its second weekend?
I think it'll probably do pretty good because a lot of people have really enjoyed the film. And I think, if you're going to go back to the theater, I think that this movie does provide a great theater going experience. The same with Dune. It makes you realize, wow, because I saw this at the Chinese in IMAX, and it certainly was a lot of fun to watch. And it's definitely a theater. You want to see this movie in theaters the same way. I can't stress enough that people really should see Dune in the biggest theater possible because it truly is an experience. And this No Time to Die had a little bit of that as well. There's an epic scope to this movie that I think really people will go see it. And I think that they will be satisfied having seen it in a theater at a good theater. So it gives good theater experience, John. So I would say I hope it does well its second weekend. I mean, I hope that it has good word of mouth and that it travels. I think a lot of people I've talked to, I was particularly hard on it myself, but a lot of people have told me how much they like the movie, which is great.
Well, and that's the beauty of film, man. Everybody has different experiences with it. Question is for you guys. What do you think about this? Were you surprised by the opening weekend numbers? Again, by a lot of accounts, $56 million is great. Hooray. For me, I thought its ceiling was much higher, especially when you look at how well it's doing overseas. Why do you think it does so much better in other markets than it does here? Whatever you guys are feeling about this, jump down into the comment section below and let us know your thoughts.